This is Big Tasty Sports.
We're back with the DFS Huddle, ready to look through this DraftKings slate and find some good plays for this week. Yanni, happy Thursday night to you. How's DFS looking for you this week?
I think it's a pretty good week. I didn't have a great weekend last weekend. Outside of, I did kind of hit my one featured player, which was nice, but outside of that, not a whole lot went right. So I'm kind of eager to get back on the horse. And I mean, there's some interesting players this week. I think the big key for this week, in my opinion, is trying to find a little bit of diversity, because I think a lot of people are going to be keyed in on some of the same targets here.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And especially right before we came on, we were talking about the smaller slate when you have a lot of people on buy and stuff. That probably consolidates ownership even more potentially. So,
right.
Yeah, last week I think I basically broke even. It's funny, the lineup that cashed for me, because I played 4 lineups and one of them cashed. It was my Bryce Young lineup because I had Bryce Young with those Dolphins coming back and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was a good one. Let's see. And then I ended up throwing Kendrick Bourne in as well. That was like
a
late
too.
addition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that worked out well too. So,
yep.
All right. Well, we'll go through it here and see if we can get something to really pop this week. We are going to, as always, just go position by position, talk stacks and stuff as we go, and then we will talk about lineups that we like at the end. As always, please do follow at Yanni_bet at the Bet Crushers and check out betcrushers.com. Also, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments, let us know what your favorite DFS plays are for this week. And maybe if you make a good case, we'll tail along with you as you tail along with us. All right, we're going to start with quarterback, and we are going to go $6,000 and up, Yanni. Who are the guys that you really want to target in the top tier this week?
To be honest with you, I'm really only looking at one player here, and that's Geno Smith right at the bottom there at 6,000. That Cardinals defense we've talked about it on different weeks. They're not very good. I think Smith is going to kind of have a nice, I'm going to call it bounce back performance. They had some struggles in the red zone, some different things against the Bengals. But I think this is the matchup here. I mean, obviously, when you look at the slate, Mahomes is technically facing the 32nd against opposing quarterbacks. And I think he'll probably have a nice game. It's Mahomes. He could have a great game. But for that price tag, he hasn't been consistent enough for me. So even in a great matchup, I'll take Geno Smith. There is one other guy that I would just mention. If TJ Watt does not go for the Steelers, and as of Thursday, he's not practicing. Now he could practice Friday and go. If he doesn't go, what we saw last year is that defense is night and day without Watt in that lineup. If he's out, I think Stafford becomes a play at that point. If he plays, I'll probably steer away from that and stick with Geno Smith.
Yeah, the pressure rate is massively different. So I like that call. I actually hadn't seen that update on the injury, so that's something to watch for sure, because that Rams offense certainly has a lot of potential, and you get so much consolidation there of usage. It's basically Kupp and Nakua that he's throwing the ball to the majority of the time, and we'll get there when we get to running back, but now Kyren Williams is out this week as well, it looks like. So that's even potentially more usage focused on the wide receivers. So I like that. I like that call if he's out for sure. I have Geno Smith written down as well. I mean, against that Cardinals defense, you probably want some pieces of the Seahawks. The other 2 guys I had written down, and you mentioned one of them, I've stayed away from Patrick Mahomes this year, and that offense hasn't looked great. I just feel like this is a pretty good spot.
It is.
And so I haven't built any lineups with him yet, but I've had it on my radar to think about potentially. When we get there, I actually don't mind going to Pacheco in this spot instead of Mahomes and hoping that they get the running game going. And then the other one for me, we talked about it on the show on Tuesday or Monday night we recorded, is I think the Bills could have a really big week this week. And so I don't mind considering Josh Allen here either, just because I think they could put up a lot of points. And so if they do, he's going to have a lot to do with it. Do you have any thoughts on playing Allen? I know, he wasn't on your list, but
yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's playable. He has actually, the last 7 meetings against the Patriots, or 6 meetings against the Patriots, he has diced them up. 3 TDs. 18 touchdowns, 1 interception. So 3 TDs on
Wow.
average and not throwing an interception. So he has definitely owned them the last 3 seasons. And that Pats defense, as we know, continues to be banged up. Not only the big name guys that we know are out, but they've got kind of that secondary tier of guys, the Jonathan Jones of the world, and that those guys are questionable too. So you look at that, and New England has also been over for the most part. They've obviously struggled when they've fallen behind, but for the most part, their run defense has been okay. So I don't see the Bills necessarily running the ball a lot or necessarily effectively throughout the game. So they may have to kind of lean on the pass a little bit more. So long way to answer that. But yeah, I think Allen's definitely in play here if you want to spend the money. I think the challenge that you have this season is, as of right now, Allen only looks at Diggs. So obviously, if you want to partner that up, you're spending a lot of money. We can get to that when we get to receivers. But that's kind of my only, I guess, hesitation on that.
Yeah, that's a lot of money on 2 positions if you go Allen Diggs for sure. All right, well, let's I think we're kind of in agreement at least of where to look in that top tier. What about the bottom half of the position this week? I've got a few guys that I think are interesting here. Anybody you're looking to in that below 6,000?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's guys you could play. Obviously, you're going to be kind of rolling the dice with these guys, which you would expect when you get to that lower price point. But I think there are guys that definitely have a lot of potential this week. Whether or not they're recognizing it, we'll see. But I think that Baker Mayfield is an interesting play. I know he doesn't necessarily light it up, but a home matchup, I think that he could have a decent game. Josh Dobbs, believe it or not, I think is a potential play in that Seahawks game. Don't love it, but I mean, he's there. And, it looks like Daniel Jones is probably going to play. If he doesn't, I think Tyrod Taylor's in play there. I think you could look at Sam Howell on the other side there. And then even if it looks like Aiden O'Connell is probably going to get the start for the Raiders. And I know he kind of fizzled in his one previous start. He wasn't great, but they've got a good matchup against the Bears there, and he's $4,700. So, if you want to go cheap at that position and maybe pair him up with Adams and Jacoby Myers, you can look at doing that. So I think there's a lot of options there. I don't know that I love any of them. And I guess what I would say to wrap my part up here is you go just a little bit higher and you get a little bit more of a sure thing with Geno Smith, in my opinion. But that's also me putting a lot of eggs in one basket with Geno Smith. So I'm curious which guys you like in that lower tier here.
Yeah, man, I was hoping Garoppolo would play because I was going to like that. And I actually was going to like that. And we could still talk about it. I mean, I wouldn't totally rule out playing a Raiders stack with O'Connell even. Hoyer's tough for me to get to, and I would almost go with Jacoby Myers and then Mayer at tight end. But that's something we could talk about if we get there. The other ones I like is I think Jordan Love's in play. He's not done well lately, but that Broncos defense just isn't likely to get much pressure on him at all. And he may have Aaron Jones back, which we can talk about Aaron Jones on the ground as well. But I just think this could be another game like at the beginning of the season where he ends up looking pretty good, but it's because he doesn't have to do too much. And he's always live to run a touchdown or two in as well. So I don't mind him. Tyrod Taylor, I wrote down, I'm with you. If he plays, I think that's a place you can look. And then the other one, which makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit, but I'm going to say it anyway, is Kenny Pickett. He might be getting Deontay Johnson back this week. He's not been good. The problem here is that the Rams defensive line is probably going to be able to get some pressure on him and what happens then. But I don't think they're really going to be able to run the ball against that Rams front is the problem. And so what does that leave you with is trying to throw it. And if the Rams offense is able to put up points, then they're going to be chasing as well. So I could just see this being a game script where Kenny Pickett has to try to throw the ball a lot. And he does have some capable weapons at receiver. And he's $5,000 is what it comes down to. So as far as a low tier option, he's at least someone I'm considering building a lineup with.
I get it. And I think that re-addition of Deontay Johnson back into that offense, that's big. I mean, essentially you can say Pickens is their one, but realistically, Deontay Johnson's probably a more polished receiver, maybe not as flashy.
Yeah.
So, in essence, you're getting back your at least wide receiver 1A, if you don't want to call him wide receiver 1. And I mean, I think that does make a difference. So, when you look at that, I get that. I'm going to ask you one question on this one here, because this was one I kind of went back and forth on a little bit. Desmond Ridder, what do you think in that matchup with Tampa there? I mean,
I think for me, I think Desmond Ridder, the places that I would like to play him is games where they're likely to be behind and he's going to be forced into throwing. I also think that Tampa defense is pretty good, and Ridder is so turnover prone that I can't say I like this matchup for him.
Mhm.
Though there are spots. I mean, I heard somebody say one of the Millie makers, one of the winning lineups was a Desmond Ridder lineup last week. So
I mean, even though he threw 3 picks, he still
yep,
had 320 yards, a couple touchdowns, rushed the ball.
yep,
So,
and he's so cheap.
yeah, and that's what I mean. I'm trying to get myself there. I don't know if I can, but at 5,200, my thought to your point is if they don't run the ball well against Tampa, kind of your philosophy there with Pittsburgh and the Rams there, they're kind of forced to throw at that point. And I mean, he has put up the last few weeks, he's put up some yards. Now, obviously,
He
turnovers,
has.
we'll see. But I mean, realistically speaking, even with turnovers like last week, you can still get a decent performance out of him. So I don't know. I was just curious to get your thoughts because I was trying to get there with him, and I'm like, maybe he's in play, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about them probably clogging up the run game, and they're throwing to Bijan Robinson a lot, actually.
Sure. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think right now, at least, I'm going to say that I would go with Pickett over Ridder this week because of the spot. If I had to pick between the two, but I don't. I mean, I end up changing my lineups on Sunday morning
Oh yeah,
sometime
of
as it all
course.
settles
Of
in.
course.
So
Yeah.
that's just where I'm at the moment. But it's a good question between those two. I think some of
Yeah.
it may depend too what stacks you can create and what else it allows you to play when you get down
Right.
the road, right?
Right.
So, all right, great, and we'll watch the Daniel Jones news too because I think that's interesting.
Yep.
All right, let's go to running back, and we're going to do the same thing here, $6,000 and up. So, sort of the top half. What do you like for running back this week?
I'm going pretty far down the list, or I guess somewhat far down the list. I love Kenneth Walker again. I mean, I've been kind of
Boom.
riding him a little bit, and he's been mostly producing. I mean, I think he has a very favorable matchup. They're likely to be winning or at least scoring a lot of points in this game. So I think Walker is definitely a great option. Aaron Jones, I like. I'm a little nervous that maybe they try to kind of pitch count him back in a little bit. That's my only concern is I think if he has a full workload, he's probably going to have a great game. That Denver defense we know doesn't stop the run. Jones this is the type of matchup he normally thrives in. I just worry if they're kind of going to kind of have that, let's try to get him 8 or 10 touches this week and work him back slowly. And, that's my concern there, but I definitely think you can still consider him. After that, I'm going to go down. What was your cutoff there? I'm sorry.
6,000.
Okay. That's I've got a couple more then, because this is actually for me where the sweet spot is. I think that Pacheco is definitely a great play. You mentioned him when talking about Mahomes. Even if you play Mahomes, I still think you could stack both. And I realize Mahomes doesn't throw to Pacheco a lot, but I think they both could get theirs. But I definitely like Pacheco. And then probably my favorite play of the weekend is Brian Robinson. And, there's a couple things here. To me, Brian Robinson is this week's Kyron Williams. And what I mean by that is he's been consistently getting the ball in the end zone, and his yardage production has been, it's been okay. I think this is the week that he continues to get the ball in the end zone, but I think his yardage production spikes here in this matchup. I think everything is lined up for him. And what I think a lot of people didn't realize, and actually I didn't until the stat was pointed out, up until 2 weeks ago, he had the longest streak of games with over 50 yards rushing, like 10 in a row,
Wow.
dating back to last year. And obviously that's not huge, but that's a good floor to start with, where it's like, okay, I know I'm getting some points out of this guy. I feel like this week is kind of that Kyron Williams repeat, though, where he's going to hit that 100-yard mark. And, obviously he's pretty consistent scoring. So if he can get a couple touchdowns for you, I think at his price point, he's a guy you got to look at.
Yeah, my season-long overs on his rushing yards. Hope you're right. I mean, he's on a fine pace right now, but I wouldn't mind one spike game to create a little cushion there, you know?
Sure.
Um, yeah, so I'm with you. My favorite plays here are Walker and Pacheco. So I'll start with those two. Those are my favorite. The other places that it's funny because I was the same with Aaron Jones. It's like, man, if you play enough lineups, I think you probably want to play him in a couple because I think it could be just a killer spot for him. The question is usage. So I'm
Right.
probably not playing him like in a small field tournament or a cash game. But man, if you want to take a shot, I think he could be worth a shot. And then I actually, to go to your point with Brian Robinson Jr., who I do like this week as well, I kind of like in that game stacking the running backs. I don't mind Saquon Barkley here. I think they're going to need to continue to try to rely on him a lot, and I think he'll be able to run the ball against that Washington defense. So I like both of the running backs in that game as well.
Even, and I'm just curious, even at the price point for Barkley there at the 8,100, you like potentially stacking that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, again, it depends on what else you want to do. But I just think that as he comes back and is healthy, they're going to rely on him for so much of their offense. That the usage is so high that against defenses that aren't as strong or haven't proven themselves to be as strong, it's definitely something that I would consider. Now, I will say, again, it depends on how many lineups I'm playing and what construction I want to have. I like Kenneth Walker better than Saquon Barkley, and he's cheaper by quite a bit. So I'm not going to force it. But if it worked and I was wanting to get both sides of that game, it's potentially something I'd look at.
Yeah. One other, and I'm asking you questions tonight for a change here,
I
but
love
I'm
this. This is
curious.
exciting.
Well, I'm curious your thoughts on Austin Eckler. I mean, obviously he's always very high priced. He's usually the top or second, running back price there. Kansas City's defense has been good. I got to be honest though, and I don't think I'm going to play him just, again, based really on cost, but I have a feeling he has a huge game in this game. I really do.
It's a good question. So when I was going through looking at who I was going to write down, I think Eckler's a guy you want to consider every week. And what it ended up being for me was the matchup. I actually think that this game could end up being like lower scoring than you'd think. I mean, I bet the under on this game.
I did too. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So I think that's all that keeps me off of it. I mean, certainly when he's healthy, he's going to get a ton of usage. So you're going to at least get a lot of opportunities, but the price point is so high.
Yeah.
I'm unlikely to go there. And maybe he kills me, but
well, I mean, obviously he's a guy, he could have 3 touchdowns any game and you won't be surprised. Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I kind of like with Desmond Ridder, except on the opposite end, a lot of money versus Ridder being cheap.
Right.
I'm not trying to be like, yeah, should I get Eckler? But I think you're right. The price and the matchup, it just doesn't make enough sense.
Yeah. Especially with the guys lower that I think are, like I almost like as much and they're way cheaper.
Exactly. I think that's week. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's go down to below 6,000 here. Are there any value plays that we can find at running back to slot in if that's needed?
I think so. A guy that I think we can look at is Kareem Hunt. I think he's probably going to take over RB1 duties there, or at least maybe the snap share, even if he doesn't start. It's a matchup against a defense that, even though they've been pretty good against the run, I think that the Browns can still get enough on there that at his price point of 5,000, I think he's, very possible to score a touchdown. They also, the Colts also lost, I'm drawing a blank. Grover Stewart, right? Who did they just lose? Was it Stewart or Autry?
I actually don't know.
I forgive me. I should be more prepared. Either Stewart or Autry are not in on that defensive line here for Indy, I believe. So, that I think makes a difference too, because those guys are basically there to stop physical running backs. And whichever one who I think is missing, I think it's Stewart. It could be Autry. I don't know. Regardless,
it's Stewart.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the run stuff eater guy in there with DeForest Buckner, and I think that that makes a difference in the rotation. So, anyways, that was a not smooth way of saying that I think Kareem Hunt's in play.
But it's important. That's good. It's important.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is, and then I think you can stay kind of around that price range. I think we talked about Jaleel McLaughlin. He's getting a fair amount of touches in Denver. He kind of has some home run ability. And Green Bay's run defense has not been great. So I think that he's an option. And then actually a guy that not surprisingly, a guy that I really like below him is Craig Reynolds on the Lions. So we know Montgomery is out, or it looks like he's out. Gibbs is trending to playing, they said, but I don't think he's going to get a huge workload. I think Craig Reynolds, even though he's actually a little banged up too, I think at 4,900 in this game, if you need to plug a running back in and you kind of need to get under that, 5,000 mark, he's definitely a guy that you can look at. And then lastly, let me go back down to what I had here. You asked me about this. I think Latavius Murray's a guy you can play this week. And it's really all, I mentioned New England's pretty good against the run, but I think this is kind of two things. Number one, game script related. If the Bills can take care of business, and what we've seen is, obviously they played some close games like they did against the Giants, but they've also beaten up on some bad teams as well. If they do that, then obviously the Bills are going to be running the ball in the second half. Damian Harris is not going to play in this game, which means Murray is the de facto number 2 back. And they actually started him last week. He got more snaps last week than he's had all year. So he also, let me add one more thing. He gets the goal line carries as well on the 1-2 yard line. So I think when you put that at $4,400, I think he's going to get some snaps this week and has the ability to get you a touchdown, maybe get you 50 yards if the game gets out of hand, and potentially put some points on the board for you in this game.
What I like about that too is I don't have a crystal ball, but I wouldn't expect him to be very highly owned either.
No.
Right. So I think that finding a spot, and it does probably somewhat, well, honestly, the goal line touches don't rest on whether they're ahead by a lot or not. Maybe the number of carries does a bit, but to find a spot where it's worth playing someone who's cheap and isn't going to have much ownership can really move you up the board if it ends up hitting. So I really like that. You had brought that up, and honestly, I never would have looked there. So I appreciate getting to talk to you and have you bring that up.
You bring up a really great point. I'm just going to say really quick, you kind of mentioned the ownership percentage. A lot of people, when the starting guy's out, they're like, oh, I got to get the backup, right? Because that's kind of it. But what people don't always get if they're not, heavily focused and studying is sometimes if that number 2 guy goes out, then you grab the number 3 guy. It's a little more under the radar there.
Yeah.
And would you expect Murray to have 150 and 3 touchdowns? No, that's not going to happen. But could he end up with 55 yards and a touchdown or 2? It's possible.
Yeah. And at that price point, you're crushing it. So
Right.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with you. Kareem Hunt is someone that I really wanted to look to, and maybe he'll get a lot of ownership, but I thought we're sort of in that pivot time right now where it feels like it's close to 50-50, but I do think it's trending toward Kareem Hunt as well. And your point about Stewart is a big one too. That, by the way, makes me like Cleveland more in that game period. If they can run the ball. I think we talked about that on our the other show as well. So love that. I have Reynolds written down. I think you need to watch the injury report because Gibbs could play. And like you said, Reynolds was limited at practice Thursday as well. So got to watch that. Same with Roschon Johnson. I think if he's back for the Bears, he's playable at 4,600. But we got to watch and see what his injury status is going to be. And then the other one for me, all the way down at $4,000, is Zach Evans, just because he's the next man up for the Rams. And the Rams do like to run the ball some. And I think that they could have a little bit of success with that. I mean, this is, again, I'm not saying that's a guy that you want to target, but for $4,000 with a guy who is likely to get some opportunity, I think it's worth keeping in mind if you need it.
Yeah, good call.
So, all right, let's move on to receiver. I'm going to split this into 3 groups just because it's bigger, but we'll go 6,000 and up here to start again. Obviously, when we get into receiver, so many options, and a lot of it is stack dependent. But maybe, as we've talked about quarterbacks we like and other things, are there receivers you're looking to pair in there with quarterbacks, or even some one-offs that you'd consider?
Yeah, there's definitely some appealing higher priced guys. Again, you got to get creative with what you're doing if you roster these guys. If you want to take a chance with an Aiden O'Connell, if he gets named starter in that Raiders game, I think you can go with Adams at that point. I don't necessarily love Adams this week with that price tag. But I think if you wanted to take a shot with those guys, you could. I think if you do go the Stafford route, and I know we said if TJ Watt doesn't play, or I said if TJ Watt doesn't play, I might look at that. It's obviously very costly, but playing Stafford, Cup, and Nakua seems like the safest stack that you
It
can
really
do
does.
outside of maybe Tua and Hill at this point. So I think that, that's definitely in play. Now, again, if you do that, you're going to have to find some of those lower priced options for the rest of your lineups. But I mean, you just got to figure Cup's about automatic there, right? Diggs, I think, has been consistent. He's in play again. Don't necessarily love it, but I mean, he should have his usual 100 yards and, a touchdown probably somewhere in there. So I'm actually going to drop down a little bit lower, though. And both of these guys are on the injury report, but I think, as I mentioned, I love Geno Smith. For me, it's Smith, Metcalf, and Lockett this week. And, I obviously, to your point, going to have to check the injury report, make sure those guys are good, but they practiced in limited fashion. So I think that they're probably going to go, it sounds like. So the stack of those three, to me, makes a little bit more sense, just because you don't have to completely, piss away the rest of your lineup on low tier guys. You can still get some mediocre contributors in there. Whereas if you go Stafford, Cup, Nakua, that's a little harder to do. So, that's kind of where I'm at in that tier there. Is I really like those guys. And then the last one I'll say, little shakier with the quarterback thing, but Jacoby Myers has been really darn consistent. Playing really well. And again, I think he benefits from not being Devontae Adams. Teams have to pay a lot of attention to Adams. Yep. They got to kind of worry about Josh Jacobs, even though I know the Raiders haven't run the ball well. But bottom line is Myers kind of gets the benefit of that. And he obviously has a potentially nice matchup this week. So I think you could look his direction probably more as a one-off, or if you do want to take that Aiden O'Connell, Devontae Adams stack, you can do it.
Yeah. So I'm almost in lockstep with you here. I pretty much have the guys written down that you said, but I have one other guy, and then I have a question for you. So I do have Amari Cooper at 6,100, potentially as a one-off. I know the quarterback situation is iffy there, but I mean, it's a good matchup against that Colts secondary, and he's been good this year. And 6,100 is pretty cheap for a guy that can go off like he potentially can go off. So he's someone I'd consider. My question is, Bill Belichick has the reputation for taking away another team's first option.
Yep.
Now, so my question is, do you think they have the personnel to be able to take Diggs away? And do you think that'll be the strategy?
It may be the strategy. It probably will be the strategy. But I think at this point, unfortunately for New England, their defense is so depleted. They just don't have the ability to take that away. Because I think we saw that the previous 2 weeks when they, got blown out. It was like, I think their game plan was okay. They just don't have the personnel to do that. And Diggs has actually done fairly well against New England as well. Okay. So I think that even though that is the Belichick approach, I think we're seeing, especially this year, but I just don't think missing some of those key guys that they have the horses to do it.
Okay. That was my question, just because I think I'm going to play at least one Josh Allen lineup, most likely. And what I was thinking is, can I go Josh Allen, Gabe Davis, and maybe Dawson Knox or something, and leave Diggs out of it? But Diggs has been so highly targeted that I just feel like unless there's some sense that he's going to be, reduced from normal, you just can't if you're going to stack the Bills.
It's tough, and as you know, I follow the Bills closely, and
yes, I do. That's why I'm asking you.
they are making a concerted vocal approach of wanting to try to ramp up some alternate weapons because the offense has been so heavily reliant on Diggs. So, I mean, this could be a game maybe where Dalton Kincaid gets a few more targets. So again, if you want to go cheaper, one of two things is going to happen at wide receiver 2 here. And I don't know, which is why I didn't really mention it. Either Gabe Davis is going to get a lot of targets because they're going to try to force him into the game, or we're going to see a different receiver potentially slide in, a guy like Khalil Shakir or someone like that. That's why I'm a little hesitant on that. I mean, Diggs is your go-to just because what you're getting with him, even if Belichick tries to take him away. He's basically proven, even as a guy that defenses know is getting the ball, he hasn't really been coverable this year. I mean, he's been playing as well as he ever has.
Yeah, he has. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely like Diggs, Cup, Nakua, Metcalf, Lockett, and I had Myers written down as well. So let's go 4,000 to 6,000 now. So sort of a middle space. Guys that stick out to you here.
Yeah, let me look here. So Hollywood Brown, I kind of mentioned that Seahawks stack. I think that you run it back the other way with Hollywood Brown. The Seahawks, as we know, have struggled, defending the pass there, and Brown has actually played fairly well for most of the season there, in that role. So I think that he's definitely a guy. He's at 5,300, so I think you can definitely look his direction there. Um, you mentioned a guy like Kendrick Bourne. I think he's kind of that consistent. He's going to get 7, 8 targets in that offense.
Yep.
Hunter Henry may be out this week, so I think that that potentially puts even more. So he's someone you can look at in that 4,400 range. And then a guy I really like it right at that cutoff there that I think has great value upside is Curtis Samuel. Somehow, some way, he's basically leapfrogged McLaurin and Jahan Dotson in that offense. And for whatever reason, and we know quarterbacks kind of have their guys they feel comfortable with, and maybe it's because teams were paying attention to McLaurin. I don't know, but Samuel is getting the ball and he's productive when he gets it. He's scoring, whatever. So at 4,000, it's a little risky because he's technically the number 3 receiver on that team, but he's really not. So I think at $4,000, you can really get some value out of him.
We may be right or we may not, but I like when we align on things. Curtis Samuel is, I'm not saying my favorite play, like I'm going to play him everywhere, but man, looking back at how he's getting targeted and how he's being used at $4,000 against the Giants, I'm like, okay, this is a good spot for somebody who costs $4,000.
Exactly.
So, man, I kind of love this range, to be honest. There's a lot of guys I would consider playing. Zay Flowers is the man in Baltimore now. I mean, he and Mark Andrews. So $5,700 for a receiver one. I mean, I guess you could say it's 1A and 1B with Mark Andrews, but they're going to try to get him the ball. I think that's cheap for somebody like him, no matter who they're playing. I like Watson, okay, and part of that would be pairing him with Love if I was going to try to stack that up. I mean, if I'm doing Pickett, I've got Pickens and Johnson at 5,500 and 5,000. I mean, you easily stack those two guys up. And then the other one for me maybe is Rashee Rice.
Yeah.
I feel like at some point Kansas City has to figure out some kind of rotation with receivers, and Justin Watson is injured now. Maybe he starts because when he's getting targeted, he's catching the ball and doing something with it. So It feels like if they're going to turn to anyone, and he's 4,700. So I feel like obviously if you're stacking up Mahomes, then that's a place to look. But he's on my list of people I'd consider if I need somebody in that range.
Yeah.
I got a few people down at the bottom actually that I like this week too. Do you have anybody under $4,000 that you feel is playable?
I think there's some playable guys there. This is a little bit of a reach, but again, my Seahawks stack. He hasn't done anything this year, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, if you need a cheap guy and you're going that route, I mean, he could get involved. But I think you got to look at a couple guys below him there. You talked about Wan'Dale Robinson. I mean, he's kind of a guy that stepped up as, I guess, the number 1 receiver for the Giants, maybe. I don't know. But pretty decent matchup potentially for him. And what's he averaging? Almost 10 fantasy points. So at $3,800, I mean, he's there. And then the guy right below him, Michael Wilson. Again, I sound like a broken record. The stack in that Seahawks game, if you run it back, you could have Hollywood Brown and Michael Wilson on the other side. And I think, he has upside for sure. So when you're looking at that price point, I think you can definitely do that. And then on that same token, if you're really, really desperate, I think Rondell Moore is a guy that you could throw in there. He's obviously kind of a boomer bust. If you can get that 40-yard touchdown, you're loving life. If not, you may be hating life with it. So, but I think those are definitely some potential guys you could look at.
Yeah, I agree about Rondale Moore. Definitely is boomer bust. For me, Jameson Williams is going to go off at some point, I think.
Right.
And he's $3,800. Now, I don't think I'm very likely to play him this week, but I kind of hope he does nothing so that I can keep the price point and then play him in a future week. Because I think at some point he's going to get involved in this offense and he's not going to be that cheap anymore.
Right.
Wan'Dale Robinson, I have written down. I agree. I actually think Robinson and Hyatt are a potential stack on the Giants side. They're both getting more usage now. Hyatt being $3,000, I think, is ridiculous for what his role is going to be.
Let me make one real quick point. I always cut you off, and I apologize.
No, you're good. Do it.
If Tyrod Taylor plays, he's a deep ball thrower. He doesn't throw across the middle. He doesn't take chances. But we actually saw in that Bills game, he dropped a couple in the bucket to Darius Slayton. So I think a guy, if Taylor plays, I actually think Slayton could be an option, in addition to Robinson or Hyatt. Again, Hyatt's a guy that can get downfield. Taylor can drop it in the bucket. So a lot to watch for. But if for whatever reason Taylor starts and you want to play him, or even if you don't and you need a cheap option, I think any of those three Giants receivers become playable at that price point.
Yeah, I like it too. Hyatt, last week he was up to 73% of snaps. He was in there, which is just a lot higher than where he's been. So if that's a trend, it feels like he's trending in the right direction. Two other ones I'll just throw out there, not that I'm targeting, but that I think are interesting if you need them. One is Nelson Aguilar. Almost seems like he's moving up to wide receiver 2 or 3. I mean, Mark Andrews is there, so you could say 3. He's 3,400 and he's getting some opportunity. The other one that would be totally speculative, but talking about the Chiefs, they went and got Mecole Hardman back. He knows the offense. He was not great, but kind of okay. And maybe Mahomes already has a little bit of chemistry with him. He's coming back at $3,200 this week. So I think it's at least interesting, but it's week 1. So who knows how much he even gets in there.
Yeah, that would be my concern he's basically showing up on Thursday or Friday to camp. I mean, I don't know that they would throw him right in there. I mean, you never know. Reed could work up a goal line jet sweep, something for him. Right. I'd probably have to wait a week and give him a chance to kind of reacclimate before I put him in. But it's interesting. It's a good call out though. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to tight end, and here we're just going to take the whole shooting match in one shot. Where do you want to look, or interesting plays you think at tight end?
Well, first of all, I'm a little pissed off that Logan Thomas laid an egg last week. He was part of the reason I had a bad week, because I basically had him as my tight end in every lineup, and he did nothing. But that's neither here nor there. I think definitely you obviously keyed on some Ravens. I think this is a great week to play Andrews. I think that offense may have to funnel through him a little bit against Detroit. And 5,700, obviously it's a lot for a tight end, but it's not like it's Travis Kelce money that you're paying there. So
$8,000, man.
Yeah. So I mean, I think Andrews, you can definitely, put on that consider list there. Beyond that, I would be willing to give Logan Thomas one more crack this week, even though he extremely let me down. And then, I kind of mentioned him earlier. I think Dalton Kincaid could definitely be somebody this week who maybe gets 5 or 6 targets in that offense, especially if they get up. I think they're going to want to try to get some guys like Kincaid some extra reps in that. And then a guy and then I think the last guy I would say who's really kind of coming on the last couple of weeks is Michael Mayer for the Raiders. The last 2 weeks, he did nothing the first month of the season. I mean, he was basically non-existent. And then the last 2 weeks, it's like, oh, this guy's pretty good, So we got to worry a little bit about the quarterback situation there, but he's 2,700. So, and again, favorable matchup against the Bears. So I think if you're kind of like, I got to save some money somewhere, he definitely is a guy. He showed last week. He's the type of player that he can get it done. So, you're taking a gamble if you go with him, but I think he definitely could pay off.
Totally agree. I think there's a lot of guys that are playable this week, but I have 4 marked down as my favorites. There are others I'd consider playing depending on other factors, but it's Andrews, Freiermuth, who's back now too. That's another weapon potentially for Pittsburgh. Michael Mayer, and then Trey McBride in Arizona. It feels like they're flipping from Zach Ertz to Trey McBride potentially. And he's 2,600 is part of it too. So those are 2 guys who came out of college with a lot of hype, and certainly Meyer and McBride and certainly have a good skill set. So I think they're guys that if they get the opportunity could put up some pretty decent numbers.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yep. Anything on defense before we build a couple lineups that you want to point out?
I think this actually is a good defense weekend. And what I mean by that is I think you could get points from defense. Usually we talk about defense kind of being a little bit of a crapshoot and you roll the dice and hope that yours works out. But I think, obviously, I think the Bills and listen, we talked about it on our betting podcast, on your betting podcast. Their defense is going to struggle a little bit without some of their key players, but it won't be this week. I think they're going to be fine this week against New England. So I think with the way that Mac Jones is getting sacked, that offensive line is beat up and it's not very good. I could see them definitely getting some sacks, some turnovers, that kind of a thing. And then also, what else did I have circled here? The Bucks, I think at home, again, we talked about Desmond Ritter's propensity for turning the ball over there. I think the Bucks are an option. And then this one is kind of weird to me. And I understand it's a little bit of road versus home, quarterback that, but the Browns are 3,300. And I know the Colts have put up some points in that, but to me, they're one of the top 2-3 defenses in the league. You could argue they're the best. I mean, they're definitely in the top 3 or 4 defenses in the league. And at 3,400 to get a defense like that, or 3,300, I'm sorry, like, why are they less than the Colts, for example, this week?
And I know figure it out.
Yeah, I know the Browns offense isn't great and all that, but I mean, you look at that. So I think that's it. And then there is the one defense that I think you can actually go to if you are pinching pennies is I think you can go to the Chargers here. And you do want to see Bosa and Derwin James. They're questionable like they seem like they are every single week. But I mean, if they're healthy out there, we talked about that game potentially being low scoring. Mahomes has not been great this year. Let's just say it. He's been, not his usual self. So he's thrown interceptions, they put the ball on the ground, that kind of thing. So at 2,200, if you're like, hey, I love my lineup, I'm going to have to sacrifice with defense. I think the Chargers, I mean, I would take a chance on them at 2,200.
Alani, again, my favorite defense is the Browns, and it's what you at that price point with what you're getting out of that defense. And Gardner Minshew may look better than he did last week. I mean, everybody has bad weeks, but if they get pressure, I mean, there's going to be opportunities there for interceptions and stuff again too. So it's not even like they're in a matchup where it's like, oh, they're going to have no chance to get any sacks or score. I think they will. And then the Bucks were my second, and then if I have to dumpster dive, it's the Chargers. I mean, I'll just say this real quick on those bottom 3. We don't have to dwell on it, but your bottom 3 are Cardinals, Chargers, Patriots. Think about the talent level on those defenses. And the Cardinals are playing the Seahawks, and the Patriots are playing Buffalo. Out of those 3 offenses right now, Kansas City is the worst of the 3 offenses, and the Chargers are easily the most talented. Now, they don't always perform. I get it. But if you have to pick between those 3, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, the same. I mean, it is a no-brainer. At the bottom of the barrel, it's a no-brainer. Yeah,
exactly.
There's one other that neither of us mentioned as I was kind of re-looking at it here that I think you could. They're interesting, and I think they're the reason I didn't really mention them originally, and the reason I probably won't play them is I think they're due for a little bit of a regression, and I think their opponents potentially due for a little bit more of an explosion. But that's the Lions. Sneakily, the Lions have a DVOA in the top 6, I think, on defense. You don't think of that with this Lions team, but they've gone from horrible at defense to pretty good, one of the better defenses in the league. And they're playing a team that the quarterback seems to fumble with regularity. They throw interceptions that, the Ravens tend to shoot themselves in the foot a lot.
It's true.
So I think, again, if you're kind of trying to get a little bit lower there, $2,700, I think that you could consider the Lions kind of for the same reasons as the Browns.
Great call. Yeah, I like it. I think I still have this thing in my head of that the Ravens offense is going to break out here at some point.
And they might. But who knows
if they will, right? I mean, week after week, I think they will. So maybe they never will. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, Yanni, I want you to pick a stack for us to start with to build a first lineup here.
I mean, I'm good with whatever you want to do. I think it would be, if we want to get away from, let's just say the Geno Smith stack, which would be my favorite, if we want to mix it up and do something different. I mean, if you want to try my Bill stack, I'm always up for that. Or if you want to go a little bit lower and do one of the cheaper guys, I'm good with that too. If you want to do a Kenny Pickett, I'm fine with that.
All right, let's do this, because I think if we go quick, we can do a couple here. We're going to start with that Seahawks stack, just because I think we both like it and the price point is good. So we'll go Smith, Metcalf, Lockett, right? Do you think about putting Walker in there too, or is that just if you're playing? You do? Okay, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. What do you want to do with the other running back?
I mean, I don't know what we're necessarily going to have left, but yeah, I was going to say Pacheco or Robinson would probably be my 2 favorite.
Robinson, right? Let's do him because it's a little bit cheaper. And then we can always revisit it if we want to. Do you want to come back? I think here you can do Hollywood Brown, but I also think you can do Trey McBride.
I'm good
as a
with
run
that.
back. You
I'm fine with that.
okay. Do you think both or just one of them?
I would say Hollywood Brown for sure.
Okay.
McBride obviously is a little bit more of a gamble, so to speak. And McBride was how much? 20,
Let's
what
see.
was he?
He's only 2,600, so he's cheap if
2,600.
we need it. Let's see if we need it though.
Yeah.
So defense, I think we both liked the Browns, right?
I'm good with the Browns. Yep.
Okay. So now we have tight end and flex, and we have 4,900 per position. So I guess the question is here, like we could play with this a little bit. Let me just see what McBride would get us, because that's the cheap option, right?
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so that would leave us with 7,200, which would get us David Montgomery's injured, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Aaron Jones. Man, there's not a lot at that price point that
Yeah.
I mean, we could drop down a defense too, but even moving up, like there's nobody close by there, because the people that are close are Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Puka Nacua, and then Travis Kelce. I'm not pumped about any of them. So,
Yeah.
all right, so let's drop down. Maybe what if we go? I think we both think Mark Andrews could have a good week, right?
Yeah, let's see that and see who we have
that's
left.
the top end, and because we did have some cheaper options, I think we thought we're okay. So that leaves us with 4,100, which is, oh man, not much here. Oh wait, why is that only showing me running backs? Because it's only oh yeah, 4,100.
Ooh.
We could get Curtis Samuel.
I don't hate that.
Yeah.
I don't hate
That's
that.
it. And then you have $100 left. So I think this is a good place to start. And you could always play around with, if you wanted to try to swap out a running back. Other thing you could do if you drop down at flex a little and you wanted to move up from Brian Robinson, you could do that. But I like this. So Geno Smith, Metcalf, and Lockett running it back with Brown. And then you've got Kenneth Walker. Well, I guess that's part of the stack, but Brian Robinson Jr., Mark Andrews at tight end, which is nice. Curtis Samuel and the Browns.
I like it. I mean, there's not a lot of weakness in that lineup. I mean, obviously Samuel is a little bit of a home run hitter, but I mean, he's been pretty consistent. So I like that. I think there's a lot of, there's not a lot of not sure things in there. I mean, most of those guys are,
pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it looks good. All right. The next one I want to do is we're going to see if we can do this Josh Allen, Steph Diggs stack.
Let's do it.
And see what we have to do to make that happen. Up the level of difficulty here.
Yep.
Do you want to bring it back like with Kendrick Bourne, or do you just leave New England alone?
If anybody's going to put up points on New England this week, I think it'll be Kendrick Bourne, unless they can just get their running game going, which they haven't been able to do. So
surprising.
Yeah. So I mean, at this point, I would say I would probably leave Bourne out unless we, get to around that price tier and want to run it back.
Okay. Sounds good. Do you want to include Latavius Murray or Dalton Kincaid here? Either or both?
I think tight end is definitely probably should be included in this one. Obviously, with the Bills, you kind of have that two-headed, question with Dawson Knox and Kincaid. But I have a feeling I'll be surprised if Kincaid isn't more heavily involved this week than Knox. Kincaid was out last week, but I think just based on what we're hearing, I think we could see him a lot this week. So I would say let's roll the dice with Kincaid.
When it comes to the Bills, I say we go with your feelings.
let's see.
So,
we'll see.
Let's save some money on defense for now and go with the Chargers.
Sure.
So drop down to that cheaper option that we liked. Right now, I mean, we're still at 5,500 per position, so we definitely are going to have to get a couple cheaper options in here. At some point, I think you could, let's see, 5,500. I mean, you could go to the Pittsburgh receivers. You could go with Giants receivers. Rashee Rice was down there. I
don't hate, well, I'm a little hesitant on Deontay Johnson just coming back. Pickens, Pickens he's definitely a boomer bust guy, right? I mean, he's kind of whatever, but I mean, if we're taking a chance, I mean, he's a guy, I mean, we've seen him, he can make big plays.
Yep.
Let me see what else
do this first. Like, at running back, unless because we're not going to go Latavius Murray at this point. Is that, would you say, right? With the other people we've sat, or do you think it's still worth throwing him in there?
I mean, you could. I think for me, he's more of that kind of last option. If it's like, oh, hey, we got to
Okay.
squeeze a $4,400 guy in here.
Yeah.
I don't think we necessarily stack him.
So we can go Hunt. I think we both feel pretty good about, and that's $5,000, so that's not too bad. And then I think from there we either go back to Robinson and see if we can fit him in, or we could go with Reynolds too. I think we both like Reynolds as long as the injury report shakes out okay.
Right.
You have a preference on what you want to try there?
Um, I mean, whatever you want to plug in first, I think I'm good with either, any of those options. Reynolds just worries me because I have a feeling if we, you might have to be shuffling Sunday morning trying to figure out and, all that. That worries me a little bit, but it's up to you on that.
Yeah, I went ahead. Okay, I went ahead and put in Brian Robinson for now. We'll see if we
Okay.
can get to him. And then I'm trying to see if there's like a wide receiver, like one guy from each side of maybe a game that we like. I mean, you could go, Samuel and one of the Giants receivers potentially. We could see if we could get Pickens and like Nakua or something. That would probably be more ideal if we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Well,
Pickens
we're gonna
is
have to
at 5,500. Yeah.
we're gonna have to dumpster dive. Let me just check something out here real quick. Oh, nope, not even close. I was going to try to get to Cooper Cup in that game. Well, it's not even close. We're $1,200 away if I do Jalen Hyatt as the flex
Okay.
to being able to get to Cooper Cup and Pickens. But we can definitely get to Nakua and Pickens, if we wanted to do that. This one's a little tougher. It's hard to know what to throw in to those receiver spots.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like we talked about at the beginning, we're eating up so much salary with Allen and Diggs that it makes it tough. What about a guy like well, of course, quarterback. I was going to say we talked about like Jacoby Myers,
Right.
Amari Cooper.
So this is something I was thinking. What about like DJ Moore? I know that the quarterback situation is tough there, but I'm not sure that DJ Moore's worse off with Badgett than he is with Fields.
Probably not. I guess the question would be there is, do you trust him more than say Amari Cooper or Jacoby Myers there? Because Cooper's actually $400 less than DJ Moore.
I like that. I mean, I was trying to look for like a mini stack there.
Yeah,
but I think Amari Cooper in that price range is really good. So, okay, so this leaves us with, and I did put Jacoby Myers in there for now. It leaves us with 4,500, and we may be able to move up off of one of those guys because really, with people that we talked about, we've got Latavius Murray, we've got Kendrick Bourne is sitting there at 4,400. We could fit him in here pretty easily. Trying to see if there's anyone else. And then it's Samuel is like the next person. So if you're between Latavius Murray, Bourne, or Samuel in that flex, do you have a preference?
I mean, I would say probably Bourne just because we're playing kind of that mini bill stack anyways. So probably Bourne, and obviously we've got Samuel in our other lineup, so this will give us a little bit of diversity there, so we don't have all our eggs in the Curtis Samuel basket there.
Yep. So that one ends up. I think I like the first one better, but this one ends up with Allen and Diggs and Kincaid for the Bills coming back with Kendrick Bourne. You have Hunt and Robinson at running back, which I like fine. That's not bad. Amari Cooper and Jacoby Myers as the other receivers, and then the Chargers D.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the first lineup is definitely a little bit better. Probably not a little bit better. It's probably a lot better.
Probably a lot better.
Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, we I guess
you
that's
play with it, right? That's what you do. So.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I like that first one, man. Which
I do too.
I wonder how chalky it'll be because I think the Seahawks will probably be a popular place to go this week. But I also think one of the things to think about in those situations is, and I'd have to go back and rebuild that lineup, which I probably will do. But maybe you even look at that and say, okay, who is a guy that I'm not playing yet who's probably going to be pretty low owned? And can I pivot to one or two guys that are going to be lower owned in order to keep that stack? I think that's something that you could look at doing and get different enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I hear you. And as always, you're right. I mean, there's going to be high ownership with some of those guys. So can your Kendrick Bournes and your Dalton Kincaids and, can those guys step up and do some things to kind of separate you? So, yep, I hear you.
Yep. All right. I won't finish rebuilding it while we're still recording. So, Yanni, thanks for breaking down the DFS again tonight, and hopefully we both can come back with a victorious week.
It was fun, man. It was fun. I appreciate you having me as always.
Of course. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, take care.